Hi, my name is David, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about local storage. So first, let's talk about what problem does local storage even solve. So let's say we have this counter app, and we can increment it and decrement it. But the problem is that every time we refresh, we lose that data. What if we wanted that to persist and we're only limited to our front end side? So our browser has a database called local storage that can help you store this data. So if you go to inspect, application, local storage, and for this URL, we have a local storage of key and value. And this will help us with, if we want to have it -3 here, persist when you refresh it. So if we look at the documentation, there's two main methods: setting it and getting it. So we can do this example, local storage set item. So in this code, it has the counter, but functionality, but for now, we'll comment everything out and we'll just enter in this line of code, set item, last name, Smith. So now that we did that, we refresh, we see this last name and Smith, exactly what we entered here. And the idea here is that we know that we're going to save a last name. We don't necessarily know what that last name value is going to be. That's why we use this key value format. So we can retrieve this. So if we want to retrieve the last name, we do the next line of code, local storage.get item. And to find this value, we can console log it. So with this, we should see Smith in the console. Exactly. So we see it here. So to visualize this, this is our local storage. It stores values as key and value, just like what we see here. And then we refresh, that data is still there. So when we do this code, local storage set item key and value, whatever we put in as the key gets saved as the key here, and the value gets saved as the value here. And I color coded it for you so you can see it. So in your code, if you have local storage set item last name Smith, this last name is going to be the key and the value is going to be Smith. So there's two steps. You have to put it to the local storage, and then you have to retrieve it from the local storage to get the value. And to do that, we only have to identify the key one, and then we get the associated value with it. So if we want to get the last name, local storage get item, last name, and that value is Smith. So that's the documentation example. To continue on with our example, we have it here. Let me uncomment. To summarize this code, we have a simple HTML with a h1 counter, and then this p element will display the count. And then we have a button to increment and then a button to decrement. In our JavaScript code, we identify the elements with the counter element, the buttons, and then we have an initial value of 0. And then when we click on the increment counter, we increment the count, and then we update what's being displayed. And then the same thing in the decrement. So to do this, the first thing we have to do is putting it to entering the value to our local storage. And when do we want to enter values to your local storage? We'll enter it when we increment it, so it updates what we have and puts that value to the local storage. So what do we put to the local storage? So our counter value is what we're going to need to be saved, and it's going to change depending if you want to use it, depending if you increment, decrement. So that's why we use a key that stays the same, and then the value changes. So we're going to need it both in increment and then decrement. So we can create a new function here. Function save to local storage. And let's look at this, for example. So we're going to follow the same format, local storage dot set item. And here we give it any key we want. So this is what we're going to use to identify it. So we can say count sorry, I can't spell. And then the next, what do we want to save? So this value is what we want to save to our local storage. So we can put in as a second parameter and save it. So we want to do this every time they increment the counter and then decrement the counter. So we save this and add it. Great. So now we just see a count inside of our local storage with the counted value every time we press the buttons. So we can clear this out. And then if we press increment, we see 1, and it maps out to the same value we see on the screen. So that's putting it to local storage, which is the first part, because if we refresh it, we still have nothing here, but the information still remains here. So we have to use this part to display it on our browser. And when do we want to do that? When we refresh it. So when we load this page. So that first begins here with our initial counter value. So we will have to use the get. So we do local storage.get item. And that will be the key we have count. And then we can set it equal to counter value. And then we can now just do here. We're gonna have to fix something later, but to show you what we have, go back here, we see it's a -5. Refresh, it stays a -5. So we can increment 3, refresh, and then it's 3. So we got it working to persist. But then there's one edge case that we have to consider. What if this is our first time using the counter app? We don't have anything saved in our local storage yet. So if we clear this, we don't want, I guess we can do it as nothing, but we could display 0 for it to start. Because when we do this, local storage to get item, and there's nothing there, we get null. So counter value is null. To show you what I mean, let me do this. First time counter value. And then if we don't have anything on local storage, refresh it, we see that it's null. So we need a if condition for this case. So if it's not null, so if it's true, counter value, if this is true. So if there's actually a count in a variable, we can do this. Else the first time, the default one will just be 0. So if we have a value inside of local storage, it will make this counter value that value. If not, it just stays 0. See, so if we do network application, there's nothing there. That's a 0. But then we do it, it stays. So to help visualize that, let's say we're getting a local from our local storage a variable counter value, but in our local storage we don't have it. We only have country and last login, so it'll give us null. So that's why we have to do an if condition for the scenario where it's your first time using it. So that is how you use local storage. Thank you so much.